Previously said that John McCain is not a war hero, took the opportunity to revisit this old spat between the two of them. Look at what he tweeted. He writes, quote, "Spreading the fake and totally discredited dossier is
Stewart and former director for the Nixon Presidential Library and CNN's presidential historian Tim Naftali. Good to see you both.
Hi, Fred.
All right, so Alice, why doesn't the president speak for himself? Why have the acting chief of staff go out as he did today, trying to explain?
That's not unusual to have chief of staff and members of your cabinet go out and speak. The problem is anytime you're on defense, you're losing. And unfortunately, that's what it appears happened today. I think it's important, though, to really take note of what Mulvaney did say. Look, it's quite clear in this instance and many other times we have terrorist attacks or terrorist incidents. There are two people responsible for these vicious acts of violence, the perpetrator and the devil. And that is exactly the case here. Those are the people responsible here. Unfortunately,
but it's not necessarily asking the president who's responsible, but asking the president to elaborate further on his sentiment that he doesn't agree with the rise in national, in white nationalism. He's disputing, the facts, the statistics, the data, and his chief of staff, instead of answering the question about why the president doesn't take and use his platform as, the world's most powerful leader, that instead, he is unwilling to show that kind of compassion, or, he is just not going far enough.
Right, Fred, and I believe there's going to be people that are critics of this president and many on the left that say that the president can never do enough. He can never say the right thing, can never hit the right tone when it comes to a situation like this. And let's be clear, the president has offered his thoughts and prayers to the people of New Zealand. He's spoken with the prime minister. He has offered U.S. aid in any way, shape, or form that we can provide to them. And he has denounced hatred, and he has denounced
an omission to show sympathy to the Muslim community.
Look, as I said, the president has denounced acts of hate. He has denounced words that are racist, that are insensitive, time and time again. And oftentimes it's simply not enough. I think the president has made it quite clear where he stands on this. Mulvaney reiterated those positions today. And if and when the president may need to speak up further, and there was some talk about possibly giving a speech directed just on this, if the president feels that's necessary, I'm sure he'll do so. But right now, all we can certainly do is offer our prayers and sympathy and offer any U.S. aid that we possibly can.
So Tim, as a presidential historian, is the criticism fair? The president doesn't seem to go, far enough. He stops short especially when there are instances relating to hate, racism, xenophobia.
Well, I think there are two different but complementary issues. The first is the president's vision of the Trumpist party as a big tent party that seems to include 4chan friends. It seems to include people, not necessarily, I would hope, would not go and kill, but they're kind of people who would respond to some of the ideas in the manifesto that the New Zealand shooter issued. So there's that problem. And really, you want to ask yourself, should the Republican Party include under its tent those kinds of people with those kinds of ideas? The second issue is the president uses rhetoric as president of the United States that makes Islamophobia more tolerable for many people. After all, he pushed for a Muslim ban. If you look at his tweets, he discredits the Muslim religion by not distinguishing between Islam and Islamicists. He consistently sends messages that less sensitive, less stable minds might see as triggers. So I think the president has to understand he has an international obligation. We used to be a moral leader. We were flawed, yes. But the president of the United States has an enormous platform. We used to use it to talk about human rights. Right now we have a president who is sending signals that could be interpreted by unstable minds as somehow legitimating Islamophobia. And that's what I think this president has to talk about. He's not responsible for the deaths in New Zealand, but he could help clarify the environment so that people
by having his chief of staff do that on his behalf. Does that help?
Chief of staff is not enough for that. He has to do it.
And so listen to what Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib said on CNN this morning about her colleague, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
When I think to myself and pause, as a person that ran a racial justice campaign for years, who grew up in the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, in the city of Detroit, I mean, I pause and think to myself, is it because she's a Black American and she's Muslim? And so that's where I pause and say to myself, is there an issue here? And I guess our mere presence there, the fact that now there's not only one, but now 3 Muslim Americans serving in Congress, that our mere presence is going to be able to possibly break down any of these kinds of racialized, opinions, this kind of Islamophobia that I do feel like is still very present on both sides of the aisle. And I think my colleagues are not seeing that as an attack, as a saying that we just have a lot of work to do.
And so, Alice, she has said that she has received a lot of death threats. Omar has received a lot of death threats, particularly in this climate right now. So does she make a strong point in your view that there should be more leadership, coming from the White House, particularly on this issue?
Look, I think we are in a climate and in a time in our nation where the rhetoric needs to be toned down across the board. We need to be more sympathetic to people.
Well, does it begin with the presidency? Does it begin with this president? That is the question. The tone of the political discourse, yes, Fred, it starts at the top and it should trickle down. But that being said, this president, in my view, is doing what he can in this specific situation to show sympathy in this most recent situation. I am encouraged by the fact that we do have more Muslims represented in Washington, and hearing their viewpoints and hearing their needs is important. But unfortunately, they're not the only ones that are targets of attacks. There are Republicans, there are conservatives, there are Democrats, there are people from all walks of life and all political persuasions and all faiths that are unfortunately targets of death threats because of the heightened rhetoric we have in this country, and that across the board needs to be stopped, and that goes for people of all faiths. Isn't that the challenge? Isn't the White House, the president, being challenged with the responsibility? Isn't it incumbent upon him to help set the tone, to help redirect where there is this bubbling up of sentiments being displayed in different ways, leading to death threats, etc., that there's an expectation that the president should help calm people down, send a strong message. And is that happening, Alice, right now from the president?
Fred, we can all work on this together. Look, I'll be the first one to say that there's a lot of words and phrases and rhetoric that this president used that I have been on your program many times and said that I have a problem with. But at the end of the day, yes, he can certainly begin the conversation, but it's incumbent upon all of us to engage in a more peaceful tone and rhetoric that can help address a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
Real quick, Tim, only because I see you shaking your head.
No, I think the president is using these tropes, and it's the president who should be changing the climate. He is the one who started this. His campaign was based on dehumanizing people, migrants and immigrants. He is the one who has given rise to a level of rhetoric that we haven't seen from a president or presidential candidate before. He could dial it back. Of course, on the left can dial back certain things, but let's not forget where this started and who is now in the Oval Office. He has enormous power, and he has enormous possibility of persuading others. He should use it.
We'll leave it there. Tim Naftali, Alice Stewart, thanks so much to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Still ahead in the newsroom.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
For anyone running, for anyone who would run, did Joe Biden accidentally reveal his plans to run for the White House? The verbal gaffe that drew mass. Welcome back. New today, the Democratic field for president just got bigger. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand jumps into the 2020 race.
We need a leader who makes big, bold,
brave
choices. Someone who isn't afraid of progress. That's why I'm running for president.
Gillibrand's announcement pushes the crowded field of Democratic hopefuls to an even dozen. Several of those candidates are out on the campaign trail today, and Gillibrand may not be the last Democrat to throw her hat into the ring, as former Vice President Joe Biden almost announced he's running.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
So let's begin with that slip of the tongue, or was it? That may have revealed Joe Biden's plans to run for president. CNN's Arlette Saenz joining us right now. So, Arlette, good to see you. So did the former vice president, let the cat out of the bag, or was that intentional, unintentional, what?
Well, Fred, with Joe Biden, you never know what's on purpose and what's just a little bit of an accident. But he's certainly leaving a lot of hints and clues along the way. And as of now, all signs seem to be pointing towards him launching a presidential campaign. His friends have said that he's indicated it's all but certain he would run. And last night, in front of that friendly Delaware crowd, his home state, he kind of offered a bit of a preview of what a campaign message could look like. He talked about things in terms of a battle for the soul of America and said that Americans should focus on consensus building rather than division. Joe Biden also talked a little bit about the places that he's traveled to over the past 2 years during the midterm elections. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I'm the only white boy that gets to go to Alabama as a Democrat campaign. Really? Whether I was up in Montana, where president won by 40-point plurality, or in traditional Democratic areas. They all were looking for the same thing. I'll say it again. Despite our problems, I have to tell you, I'm more optimistic about the prospects of our nation today than I was when you elected me as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate. There is no reason why the 21st century will not be the American century.
So Biden there reminding voters of some of the places that he's gone to where he could be appealing as a Democrat. He also showed a direct willingness to take on President Trump. And one thing that he noted, he argued that Trump has turned his back on voters that he said he was going to look out for. And he specifically pointed to states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Those are areas of the country where Biden's allies really think he could potentially bring those states back to the blue column. As of now, we're still waiting for that potential announcement, but those close to the vice president say that could come as soon as April. Fred.
All right, Arlette Saenz, thanks so much for that. All right, let's turn now to the latest Democratic candidate who did officially announce a run for president, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, marking her presidential bid by taking plenty of shots at President Trump directly. CNN's Athena Jones joining us with more on that. What more can you tell us about her announcement?
Hi, Fred. Well, that's something that's very interesting here. Kirsten Gillibrand, ever since she announced her exploratory run back in January, she has been visiting some of the early states, introducing herself to voters, and describing herself or portraying herself as a fearless, courageous fighter who's willing to do what it takes, fight for what's right, even if it's difficult. She's also been talking about her ability to appeal to voters across party lines, rural voters as well as urban voters, and she's talked a lot about the kinds of rural counties, like in upstate New York. She's visiting rural counties in states like Iowa. Her first swing through Iowa, she was in a rural area on the western edge of the state. This week, she's going to be back in Iowa visiting several counties on the eastern edge of the state, counties that Barack Obama won, but that Trump then flipped. So it's not surprising to see her kind of trying to generate some buzz for her race and for her run by taking this fight directly to Trump, by talking about how brave she is, and by saying what brave isn't. It's very clear she's talking about the president when she says brave doesn't spread hate, it doesn't cloud the truth, it doesn't build a wall. That's what fear does. There you can see the map of the next few stops she's going to make. She's going to be in Michigan tomorrow with an appearance with the governor there, the female governor, stop through Iowa, Nevada, and she ends the week in New York City with a rally outside Trump International Hotel. So another sign she's going to be trying to bring the fight directly to Trump and hopefully get some media attention by doing that. Fred?
All right, Athena Jones in New York, thank you so much. And be sure to watch tomorrow night when Massachusetts Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren takes her message to voters in a CNN town hall. That's tomorrow night, 9 Eastern, right here on CNN. All right, next we take you to New Zealand, where the death toll in that terror attack on 2 mosques rises to 50. The Prime Minister now vowing to change the country's gun laws immediately. How she plans to do it. The death toll in the New Zealand mosque massacre has now climbed to 50. The number of injured also now stands at 50. Authorities are now racing to identify all of the victims so that their families can bury them quickly in accordance with Muslim tradition. Only one suspect now remains in custody after police released 3 others saying they had nothing to do with the shootings. We're hearing more reactions from within the Muslim community today and their frustrations with how the White House has responded to the tragedy. This morning, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib insisted something needs to be done to counter rising extremism, and it must start with the United States president.
I think he needs to pick up the phone and call the Department of Justice. There is real data and information currently right now of the rise of white supremacy right here in this United States of America. He needs to look at the data and the information and the facts and actually listen and understand the tremendous responsibility he has in being our president, our leader of our country. He cannot just say it's a small group of people. There's too many deaths, not only from the synagogue to the black churches to the temples to now the mosques. We need to be speaking up against this, and it has to start with him.
All right, joining me now is Ahmed Ali Akbar, freelance writer and host of the podcast See Something, Say Something. Ahmed, good to see you. So you heard the Congresswoman, and she says the president needs to do more. He has yet to agree that white nationalism is on the rise. So what does his position and approach say to you?
To me, his position has continually emboldened white nationalists that there won't be strong censoring happening from the strongest part of our government. And for American Muslims who, feel this tragedy very deeply, we're seeing the effects of the rising wave of white nationalism at our local level. We're seeing mosques be exposed to swastikas, to be exposed to folks approaching our mosques with weapons, to resistance to our mosques being built. And it is reflected in our everyday reality. And it is truly shocking to see when 50 people have died and he has been named as someone who is an inspiration and a symbol of renewed white identity, to deny that it's a small group of people. It's truly upsetting. Yeah,
the president being named in that manifesto. So let's listen to what President Trump's acting chief of staff said this morning on a couple of networks when asked about, criticism of the president's failure to recognize extremism as a growing threat.
I want to push back against this idea that every time something bad happens everywhere around the world, folks who don't like Donald Trump seem to blame it on Donald Trump.
So how do you interpret that?
So to me, Islamophobia is a part of our everyday society, and Donald Trump is a huge symptom of that. He's a huge a person who pushes it forward as a narrative, as something to get himself elected and to sort of rally his party. And to me, it is one of many symptoms. Focusing on Trump is a part of the problem, but I think our society as a whole has to think about the ways in which we have branded Muslims as outsiders, the way in which we have been made to be used as only a beneficiary to democratic society, as benefits towards reducing, as beneficials. Excuse me.
That's okay. You got it.
It's just that I feel like there's many ways in which Muslims are being used, our values seen as helping the security situation of many democratic nations that are we're only accepted into society if we're helping against terrorism and the like. And our place in society is much deeper than that. It's much more important than that. And I am not. I believe that there's a lot of work to do on reducing Islamophobia throughout all of society, and we have to deal with Donald Trump, but we also have to think about grassroots efforts, political efforts, the ways in which our congresswomen and congressmen can speak up against Islamophobia in their own parties as well.
Yeah. So I've been reading, so many, sentiments, and largely Muslims are conveying they have felt, hurt, and now there is this growing feeling of anger about what has happened and the kind of reaction or lack thereof, that has resulted. What are you? I mean, what's that visceral feeling that you are experiencing?
Right. It has been an incredibly emotional weekend for me, and it's hard to really think about the how big this problem has been for our community. I woke up on Friday to the news to see that 49 and now 50 people have been killed in New Zealand, and I felt like not surprised in any way, which is a horrible feeling. And I talked to many other Muslim Americans and many other Muslims around the world, and they too were not surprised because, as I said earlier, there's been a growing evidence of increasing hate crimes in America, and we see it in our everyday life that our mosques are under attack. Our mosques are, being threatened in many subtle and direct ways. And yet still, I was impressed that as I went to Friday prayers, the room was full of people. People, despite the fear that our mosques are targets, people still showed up. It was a very emotional scene of people crying. There was many folks from local Jewish community who has shown up to our prayers quite often, who was there to support us. And there's this feeling that, yes, we need support from broader American society, but there is still a lot of work to be done, and we need support on every level.
Ahmed Ali Akbar, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Still ahead. Denuclearization talks in limbo after the U.S. and North Korea failed to reach a deal. Kim Jong-un may be giving the Trump administration the silent treatment. Details on that next.